New York, the state with a heart that never sleeps. But the painful truth hidden behind that is, New York doesn't sleep because millions of people don't know where they will sleep tonight. With a population of 20 million, New York was once considered a symbol of prosperity, opportunity, and development. But in 2025, a painful paradox is unfolding, as the luxurious shopping malls and skyscrapers gradually become the backdrop for a city in decline. The homeless here are no longer just a social phenomenon. They are an indispensable part of the city's hidden corners, wandering the sidewalks, rummaging through trash to find a bit of food, survival items, and even the remnants of hope for the American dream. In today's video, we will take you into the previously unknown dark corners of New York, where those who have to sift through garbage to survive are just a part of the crisis causing the state to gradually rot. New York, the eternal symbol of prosperous America, once the gateway to the American dream, is now struggling under the weight of two simultaneous pandemics. One is the virus, the other is homelessness. On paper, COVID-19 has receded, but its consequences still lurk in every corner. In the eyes of those sleeping rough on the sidewalks, or those with no choice but to scavenge for survival. In the heart of a state of 20 million people still immersed in lights and the sound of car horns. According to the latest report from the Coalition for the Homeless, as of 2025, an average of more than 158,000 people are living in the shelter system of New York State each night. A number that makes New York the state with the second highest number of homeless people in the entire United States. Sadly, among that enormous number, there are approximately 37,218 children and over 17,000 elderly individuals aged 55 and older, the most vulnerable members of society who now struggle daily to survive in a state that has no room for anyone but profit. Homeless people in this state do not lack shelter in theory. New York is one of the few places in the United States with a legal requirement that anyone without a home has the right to be provided with housing, meaning the government is obligated to provide shelter for all homeless individuals, regardless of their circumstances. But in reality, it is far from that. They call it a shelter, but for many homeless people who have lived there, shelters are no different from prisons without bars. Moldy, filthy, rife with violence and abuse. Some people were beaten for speaking out about spoiled food, while others were retaliated against simply for demanding to be treated like human beings. But the paradox doesn't stop there. This state spends over $3 billion each year on the shelter system, a colossal amount that should have changed the fate of thousands of people. But instead of helping, that system has become a money-making industry. A multitude of private and charitable organizations control the shelters, and they are also the biggest beneficiaries. There are entities accused of profiting from lucrative contracts, while the homeless have to live in conditions no different from the apocalypse. Activist Shams calls this an ecosystem profiting from poverty, a new form of peacetime commerce where people are valued by their own suffering. What reason is there that in the most populous and wealthiest state in America, tens of thousands of people still have to live as if they do not exist? Is there something that has deviated from the path? Or is this the road we have inadvertently chosen by leaving behind compassion, sharing, and the principles that once made America proud? Being taxed for being poor, it sounds like an exaggerated, absurd joke. But in New York City, 2025, it is the reality that millions of residents have to live with every day. In a city where everything is valued at double, an 8 to 9% increase in the water bill seems like a small number, until you realize that the city isn't paying anyone else, but rather renting its own water supply system back to itself. And that rental fee, of course, is directly passed on to the bills of the residents living there. It sounds like an accounting trick, but the consequences are very heavy and serious. Tenants might think they are not affected because the water bill is paid by the landlord. But those costs will sooner or later come back, added to the rent, under the name building maintenance fee or inflation adjustment. And result? People from all walks of life, from workers, single mothers to small business owners, are having to pay more to continue surviving in a state that is becoming increasingly harsh towards its own residents. Meanwhile, those most capable of contributing are being temporarily exempted. The city is missing out on $880 million in property tax revenue, mostly from wealthy landowners who own many buildings with recorded violations. Not to mention over $2 billion in fines from traffic violations, such as illegal parking, speeding, etc., still sitting on paper, uncollected or unrevoked. Not because they can't find someone responsible, the records are still complete, but because the state seems to have chosen to turn a blind eye to these privileges and shift the responsibility onto those who are least able to resist. In that paradoxical cycle, the law-abiding citizens are the ones who are punished the most. They not only pay higher rent, but also have to buy goods and services at higher prices. Because restaurant owners, laundromats, and corner shops are also bearing the additional water costs and quietly passing that on to customers. In a place once considered the land of opportunity, everything now seems to be turning into a tax. From a morning cup of coffee, a bowl of instant noodles at night, to even the clean air to breathe, as the environmental bill is added to every utility bill. The rich evade, the violators go unpunished, but the poor cannot escape the bills. When struggling to survive in an increasingly expensive city, it feels as if their very existence is being taxed. Simply because they are poor. And when the money runs out, they are forced to pay with trust, with silent sacrifices, and with opportunities stolen day by day. How long can a state survive if it continuously rewards the violators and punishes those who still believe in the law? And if the price of living in New York is the exhaustion of the most honest people, then in the end, who will still want to stay? If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. The saying that was once the pride of New York now sounds like a mockery to the millions of workers quietly leaving this city. Because nowadays, working hard in New York is no longer the path to success. It's just enough to hold on. If you don't belong to the millionaire or real estate investor class, you'll feel like you're being excluded from a game you can never afford to join. The dual crisis of living costs and housing has turned the New York dream into a real exodus. Among those who are leaving the city the fastest, there is one commonality. They earn under $72,000 per year. That means they are not poor. They belong to the stable middle class. But in a place where the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment has reached $4,000 to $5,000 a month, even in areas far from the center like Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, staying put has become a tiring trade-off. A couple earning over $100,000 a year still had to move back to New Jersey just to find a two-bedroom apartment that wasn't too shabby. A technology engineer earning $150,000 a year, a figure once considered the American dream, after paying rent and living expenses, is left with less than $36,000 to live on, save, or dream. But the real paradox lies in the fact that the main culprit is not the rich, but the outdated and paralyzed construction policy system. The vacancy rate for apartments in New York is only 1.4%, the lowest in 60 years. The city is not lacking in land, but in the ability to build. The neighborhoods are still limited to a height of 3 to 5 stories, because the law does not allow buildings to be taller in order to preserve historical identity. As a result, millions of people are pushed into old dilapidated buildings while demand increases day by day. Even the wealthy, instead of buying, are now renting, causing the number of millionaire renters to surge by 171% since 2015. When both the rich and the poor compete for a fixed supply, you know who will be pushed out first. And while the city hesitates to find a solution, the makeshift solutions only exacerbate the problem. Freezing rental prices sounds humane, but in reality, it only makes tenants reluctant to leave, while landlords are hesitant to upgrade or build new properties. The planning proposals from the government and candidates are still going in circles, lacking feasibility. Some even suspected to be written by AI, lacking both human elements and market reality. Meanwhile, the people continue to live in overcrowded conditions, waiting for a miracle that never comes. The real solution does not lie in price control, but in increasing the supply of housing. According to experts, the city needs at least 560,000 new apartments to restore balance. Not to give away, but to create a chain of natural migration. High-income earners move into new homes, leaving their old homes for lower-income earners, thereby gradually stabilizing the rental price level. That was how the market used to operate, before it was stifled by regulations that feared not making enormous profits more than fearing injustice. New York lacks neither money nor people who want to live. The only thing this city lacks is the political will to acknowledge that a great metropolis cannot survive solely on the glory of the past. When a person earning $0,000 a year still has to share a one-bedroom apartment, it is no longer a story about high living costs, but a serious warning about the silent disintegration of the middle class. And when this class collapses, who will be left to keep the city standing? There is a paradox that only those who have fallen to the bottom of society can understand. Sometimes the safest choice is sleeping outdoors. At first glance, it seems illogical, but for thousands of homeless people in New York, stepping into a shelter, where it should be a refuge, can sometimes be more dangerous than sleeping on the cold sidewalk. According to independent reports, shelters in New York are frequently criticized for safety issues, violence, theft, or negative impacts on mental health. Those who dare to speak out about spoiled food, lack of blankets, or unsanitary conditions can become targets of retaliation. For the most vulnerable, women, the elderly, those with mental illnesses, shelters are not places for recovery, but rather places of further vulnerability. A study by the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene found that people living in shelters are 3 times more likely to contract COVID-19 than those living in the community. Cramped spaces, beds close together, lack of ventilation, and almost no ability to maintain distance. All of these turn shelters into breeding grounds for disease. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The submerged part is fear. The fear of being attacked in the middle of the night. The fear of losing the only remaining bag. The fear of being scolded by the staff or being moved without any explanation. When you live in a place where all privacy is stripped away and humanity is eroded day by day, then sleep, the most basic of needs, also becomes a gamble. The authorities can announce the number of accommodations provided. They can boast about their success in moving people from the streets into the shelter. But does anyone ask them, how many people left the shelter right after, quietly returning to the old park? Because there, at least no one would hit them. No one shouts at them for asking for another blanket. There are elderly people who were once exemplary citizens, who contributed their entire lives to this city, now having to choose between violence in the shelter and the cold outside on the streets. It's no longer a housing issue. It is a moral crack in the very way society treats its most vulnerable. And when a wealthy city like New York cannot ensure even the minimum safety for those who need help the most, can we still call it a humane system? The state of homelessness in New York, and in many other cities across the US, is not merely the result of poverty or material deprivation. Behind each heartbreaking story of the homeless lies a system riddled with undeniable gaps. These gaps do not only stem from the lack of housing, but also from the irresponsibility and lack of concern of the social system. This system, with all its policies and support programs, seems never strong enough to cope with an increasingly severe crisis. One of the biggest issues is the shortage of affordable housing. Although New York is a developed and modern city, it cannot meet the basic needs of thousands of people who need a roof over their heads. As rental prices continue to rise, the incomes of many families cannot keep up. Those who cannot pay rent will fall into homelessness, but the system lacks sufficient infrastructure to support them. The temporary shelters are becoming increasingly overcrowded, and the homeless have nowhere to go except wandering the streets or living in makeshift encampments. Although New York City and social organizations have implemented programs like Housing First and supportive housing initiatives, they are still not sufficient to address the long-term homelessness situation. These programs are merely temporary solutions and cannot provide sustainable stability for those living in hardship. Homeless people not only lack housing, but also lack support services such as mental health care, vocational training, and employment assistance. The lack of these services is what keeps them trapped in the cycle of poverty and deprivation. In addition, the issue of support policies from local authorities is also a significant gap. The uneven and opaque support programs prevent homeless individuals from accessing the necessary resources. Although the city is committed to addressing this issue, the actual actions are still too slow and lack coordination among the relevant authorities. Homeless people not only face a lack of shelter, but also confront ineffective policies that do not provide long-term solutions for them. The American social welfare system, especially in large cities like New York, is overloaded and being pushed to its limits. Therefore, helping the homeless is not just the responsibility of charitable organizations or city authorities, but of society as a whole. We cannot continue to abandon the vulnerable, leaving them to struggle on their own in a system that is unable to support them. Can we continue to live in a society where the gaps in the system leave thousands of people behind? Or is it time for us to stand together and demand a fairer system, where no one has to live in the shadows of neglect and humiliation? In a society where businesses are often viewed through the lens of profit, the homeless industry has become a harsh and paradoxical reality. It is an industry where deprivation, suffering, and the weariness of people become factors that generate profits for a significant portion of society. While millions of people struggle with homelessness, some organizations and individuals are finding ways to profit from this very poverty. Shelters, temporary housing, and homeless support services, while providing assistance to some who need help, do not always bring about sustainable change. The companies operating these facilities sometimes see them merely as a business opportunity, and therefore they apply ineffective management models, focusing solely on maximizing profits instead of improving the quality of life for those in need of support. Some shelters have been criticized for poor living conditions, overcrowding, and a lack of long-term support programs for the homeless. With the rapid increase in the homeless population, these services have developed into a separate industry. Organizations provide shelter, but sometimes only offer temporary solutions instead of helping the homeless reintegrate into society. Housing for the homeless has now become a market that private organizations participate in, with a profit system that sometimes forgets the original purpose: helping the poor and vulnerable. But in the homelessness industry, the story sometimes revolves only around land lease contracts, profits from providing temporary housing, and funds from charities and the government. Investors and private companies, although they may provide some necessary services, often overlook the importance of making real changes in the lives of those affected. This creates a significant contradiction. While these organizations can profit from homelessness, those who face this reality do not receive sufficient help to escape the cycle of poverty. This situation is further exacerbated when cities and local governments cannot provide enough affordable housing and long-term support services. Instead, they focus on temporary solutions, shelters that later become profit-making ventures for those in the homeless industry. This creates an endless cycle of poverty, as the homeless cannot escape the temporary solutions and have no opportunity to rebuild their lives. The homelessness industry is not only a heartbreaking reality of the abandonment of the vulnerable, but also a wake-up call about the gaps in the social system. If society continues to view homelessness as a profit-making issue, when will these people ever find light on the horizon? Can we continue to let people live in the shadows of poverty and deprivation just for profit? Or will we stand up and demand real change so that the vulnerable can find their way back to a normal life? And when these businesses continue to profit from the misery of others, the question arises, do we truly understand the value of life? Or are we merely living in a society where everything can be reduced to money, including human pain and despair? New York, the state known to the world for its never-ending lights and streets always brimming with life, is now facing an undeniable bleak future. When 20 million people still call this city home, the homeless, using trash bins and parking lots as shelters, are the clearest evidence of the growing divide within the heart of the city. While skyscrapers continue to rise and prosperous neighborhoods keep developing, a large portion of the population struggles daily to survive, grappling with the scraps left behind from the city's wealth. The future of New York is becoming bleak as the homeless have to sift through garbage to survive. They not only lack material resources, but also opportunities to change their lives. Even with initiatives from the government and charitable organizations, the truth is that these support programs are only temporary solutions and cannot bring long-term stability to those living in dire conditions. One of the heartbreaking scenes is when the homeless not only rummage through trash to find food, but they also have to face ostracism and contempt from the surrounding community. The increase of dead zones in the city only adds to the sense of despair. Abandoned lots, deserted street corners, and forgotten roads have become shelters for those marginalized by society. They not only lack a roof over their heads, but they also lack recognition as human beings and the opportunity to reintegrate into society. While New York continues to develop, the homeless are being pushed out without any protection or real help to escape poverty. This situation is only getting worse as the rate of homelessness continues to rise and there are no signs of any significant policy changes. When affordable housing remains a luxury and development projects only cater to the needs of the wealthy, the question arises, can New York continue to thrive while the poor struggle to survive in the shadows of neglect? The homeless are not only victims of poverty, but they are also victims of a system that is failing to protect the vulnerable. The future of New York is not just a story about housing or social services, but about justice in a society that is gradually losing its fundamental values. Can New York continue to live in the glory of development while thousands of people are fighting every day to have a place to call home? Can we find a sustainable solution to address this situation, or will we continue to let the homeless become ghosts in the heart of the city, people who have no value in a society that only cares about wealth and success? Can we create a fairer New York where no one has to live in abandonment, or is it all just a dream in a city that has lost its way back to peace? New York, a city once symbolizing prosperity and opportunity, is now facing an undeniable crisis. The homeless, those with nowhere to go, must struggle every day to survive in a city where the American dream seems to be gradually collapsing. When the bright streets become a survival ground for those rummaging through trash, we cannot help but ask, can we continue to live in a society where poverty and deprivation are becoming an industry, or will there come a day when we act together to restore the value of dignity and opportunity for everyone? What do you think about the homelessness crisis in New York? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel and stay updated with our latest videos. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. This video is based on reports, data, and information publicly released from media sources, non-governmental organizations, and state government statistical data. All opinions, analyses, and arguments in the video aim to educate, critique society, and raise community awareness, not to criticize any specific individual, organization, or government. We respect all differing viewpoints and encourage viewers to comment in a civilized and responsible manner.